What's a better alternative to the plan as it currently exists, which is a non-plan, an invasion of Gaza without a clear objective? And I think there's a real cascade of events following Hezbollah, following likely then U.S. involvement.
You could see how that could become a much larger conflict very, very fast.
There are some in the U.S. that are so bloodthirsty that might want to use this conflict as an excuse to do what they otherwise might have wanted to do anyway, which is reopen broad-scale regional war in the Middle East.
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we are going to be reviewing Vivek and Tucker's most recent conversation, which has blown up Twitter this week. Vivek and Tucker have been dragged across the coals for this one. But this one makes me respect Vivek even more than I already did, because his stance here isn't the greatest if you're trying to become president, but I believe that it bears a lot of truth. So I'm going to be providing a lot of context to what they're talking about in regards to this World War III fear. So with that, let's get into it.
The U.S. military is weaker than it's been in at least 50 years since the end of Vietnam. Exhausted by two pointless conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, internally divided by identity politics, mismanaged by buffoonish hacks at the Pentagon, our services are in obvious disarray. Check the enlistment numbers. Nobody wants to join. But it's worse than that. The government that funds our army is bankrupt. The man who leads it is senile. Now is not the time for a world war. We would lose. But our commander-in-chief has no idea. Watch this tape from Sunday as he smirks while bragging that America is so rich, there is no limit to our power. We can wage as many wars as we want.
We're the United States of America, for God's sake. The most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world. The history of the world. We can take care of both of these and still maintain our overall international defense. We have the capacity to do this, and we have an obligation to. We are the essential nation, as to paraphrase the former Secretary of State. And if we don't, who does?
The most powerful nation in the history of the world. You can imagine the Roman Senate issuing a statement just like that on the morning the Visigoths sacked their city. Pride goes before destruction. That has always been true. It always will be true. How do we keep our country from being destroyed? Vivek Ramaswamy has been thinking about that all week. He joins us on set now. Vivek, thanks so much for joining us. So, what do you think the potential for disaster looks like here? And I should preface by saying,
guys, if you enjoy this sort of video, then I actually need your help with this one, because my last video where I did Vivek Ramaswamy taking on Hannity, where I basically just said that there shouldn't be a World War III, that video got not only demonetized, but also age restricted. So you can tell that the powers that be do not like this narrative. So if you don't mind helping me out by hitting that like button, subscribing to the channel, and finding me on other platforms, just in case, that's greatly appreciated. Back to the clips.
Saying nobody disputes Israel's interest in pursuing a conflict with Hamas, punishing those responsible, yes, defending itself, of course.
Absolutely.
But from an American perspective, how could this go wrong?
So I think that one of the things we ought to do is remember the mistakes we have made in our own recent past, in the last 20 to 25 years. After 9/11, how did we end up in $6 trillion plus of wars in Iraq and Afghanistan? Thousands of American lives that we won't get back. Part of how we ended up there was in the era after 9/11. You remember it. The tolerance for debate was very limited. Shut up, sit down, do as you're told, go along with the plan. I am worried, Tucker, that's the beginning of the environment I'm seeing right now as it relates to the current conflicts.
We seem deep into that right now.
We do seem deep into that, and it's in the modern West as we know it. I mean, even Bibi's former national security advisor was quoted in an article earlier today when he was asked the question of, well, what happens after Hamas? His exact words were, I don't give a damn. I used to think first, act later. I don't think that way in light of last weekend. And I understand, as I did in this country, the pain of what people have gone through. You respond with emotion. But the thing I worry about, Tucker, right now is what I see is the left-wing criticism of Israel's what looks like to be soon to be ground invasion of Gaza is about proportionality and about injustice and humanitarian aid. Even if you just put all that to one side, from a U.S. perspective, from an Israel perspective, how is this actually going to achieve a good result? And my concern right now, and as we're having this conversation, it appears imminent that Israel is going to mount a ground invasion into Gaza. I'm concerned that a ground invasion into Gaza without clearly defined objectives is going to be the start of another no-win war that is not good for Israel and not good for the United States. And so one of the things I've been thinking about just in recent days, you hear a lot of histrionics here, a lot of bloodthirsty neocons, in fact, far less reasonable than even many Israelis that are far more rational about this than some here in the United States, is how could this play out? Right. So if we just think about one reasonable scenario, let's just go step by step in terms of where we are. Israel mounts a ground invasion into Gaza. Okay. Doesn't have a clearly defined goal, but they've mounted that ground invasion. That crosses a red line that Hezbollah has previously identified, saying that that's their red line for attacking Israel. And this might be exactly when Israel is mired in a ground conflict in Gaza, which I worry could be a trap. Networks, kilometers upon kilometers of tunnels. A lot of traps that they could walk into. That could be a moment that's perfectly appropriate, unfortunately, for Hezbollah to decide to go after Israel. Israel's then in a two-front war, both in the north and the south in Gaza. Now you're talking about real risk of, there's no way that you're really going to avoid some level of U.S. involvement there. Now look at what the Iranian-backed militias in other places like Iraq, like, you know, the Badr group in Iraq. You talk about the Houthis in Yemen. What have they said? This is also going to be their red line for involvement. So now you have broader regional conflict at a time when you have civilian casualties in Gaza. That turns the rest of the world's back on Israel. By the way, even in the case of success, ending up with what fills the vacuum, Hamas 2.0, with a bunch of radicalized Palestinians. So I don't think I think that's unfortunately, a reasonable way for how this could play out.
Can I just ask you to pause a sincere question? What is the plan? I mean, this is something the United States has preemptively endorsed and is paying for, so I think it's fair to ask that question. What is the plan?
Well, I think that's the elephant in the room that's missing, is that we don't have from Israel a clear sense of what the objectives are. Now, in the United States, we should be reasonably helping our partner who is struck in the case of really a devastating and inhumane hit to their country. It was barbaric. I think our job is to tell them these are the mistakes we made in the wake of 9/11 when that happened to us here. This is a time to have a clearly defined objective. Instead, we get histrionics from the likes of Lindsey Graham or Nikki Haley or Mike Pence offering histrionics at a time when you actually could use rational strategy.
It's amazing to get a moral lecture from people who've so diminished our country and who are responsible for the deaths of so many Americans lecturing you from some high horse.
It's interesting. They cite their foreign policy experience, which I don't have, but they wear it as a badge of honor. I think that their foreign policy experience, unfortunately, shows in terms of the results that they have delivered for this country. My view is, look, a lot of neocons here are far more bloodthirsty than even some more realistic minds in Israel. What's a better alternative to the plan as it currently exists, which is a non-plan, an invasion of Gaza without a clear objective? And I think there's a real cascade of events following Hezbollah, following likely then U.S. involvement, following Iranian militias in Iraq in Yemen.
And U.S. involvement would almost, I mean, especially if it's involvement in Lebanon or against Hezbollah, you could see how that could become a much larger conflict very, very fast.
Absolutely. And even think about Israel's ability to fight Hezbollah. The last time they were in a war with Hezbollah was 2006. It didn't go very well.
So guys, I just want to preface what I'm about to say with the fact that these aren't necessarily predictions or even really opinions. What I'm trying to do here is give some context to what Tucker and Vivek are talking about here in regards to why they believe it's important for cooler heads to prevail, especially in a moment like right now, where it's important for people to not take actions that could have global ramifications without a clear plan. I'm also going to try and put myself into the shoes of the people that I'm talking about a little bit here. But at the end of the day, I'm not in the clandestine meetings, unfortunately, where all the shots are being called, as interesting as that would be. And it's a very deep wormhole, very easy to get lost in the details. So I'll do my best here to keep this watchable and as short as possible. So as I make this video, and as has been the case for the last at least week or so, there are wide-ranging reports that Israel are preparing for a ground invasion of Gaza. And this has a lot of people very concerned about what that actually entails, but also about the domino effect that it could have in terms of a global conflict. And a lot of people have been talking about the potential for Iran and the US to get involved, and even as far as China and Russia. So here's why. Ynet News reports Iran television drew from its viewers the regime's plan for the attack on Israel. Quote, they will be hit from all sides, unquote. The report said the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen will launch a coordinated attack, including missile fire and attack drones to create a siege of Israel. It goes on to say Iran claims the Houthis possess missiles with a range of some 2,000 kilometers, nearly 1,250 miles, and Hezbollah has advanced rockets able to target Israeli naval vessels and Tel Aviv. The report also said the pro-Iran Iraqi militias were entrenched in the Syria part of the Golan Heights. Quote, such an attack could begin within days if the Supreme Leader's demands to stop Israeli strikes on Gaza are ignored. So the obvious part here is that Iran, a fundamentalist Shia Muslim nation, are ideologically diametrically opposed to Zionist Israel. But are they that much of a threat? Let's have a look. Despite very heavy sanctions from the US, which have left them in a pretty bad financial situation, having denied them over $10 billion in oil revenue, Iran's still been making some moves. China, who never miss a beat in these situations, are their biggest trading partner and their only customer for oil exports. This is because the sanctions imposed by America punish countries that work with Iran. Furthermore, as of August this year, Iran have officially been invited to become a member of the BRICS alliance. This is a big move for them in terms of strengthening their geopolitical relations with countries like China, Russia, and even Saudi Arabia. Why is Saudi Arabia significant? Well, Saudi Arabia and Iran haven't been on talking terms for a while. But this changed on the 10th of March this year when China came along and said, listen, fellas, they said, Iran, I know you guys are Shias, and Saudis, I know you guys are Sunnis, and you both probably see yourselves as the leader of the Muslim world, and you've been fighting proxy wars against each other in Yemen and other places, but listen, boys, we've got bigger fish to fry here. Can't you see who the real enemy is here? The United States and the Israelis want you guys fighting against each other, and they've been pushing you guys around for years. Look at you. You got all that oil, some of the most naturally resource-rich countries in the world. You can just let them push you around like that.
They got you by the balls.
So put your differences aside and let's join together. Putin's on board. He's got our back. Same with the lads from Brazil, South Africa, even India's on board. So if we come together on this one, we might have a real chance of de-dollarization and of knocking those Yanks off their pedestal. That's how I imagine it went down in my head anyway. So anyways, after 4 days of secret talks in Beijing, the Chinese brokered this quite amazing deal, to be honest, where the Iranians and the Saudis agreed to restore formal diplomatic relations. And a few months later, they're both invited to join BRICS, and now the team is looking strong. And it's great for Iran because they've been pretty geopolitically isolated for a minute now, and now they got some friends. But behind the scenes, since the revolution of 1979, the Iranian Ayatollah has been planting some seeds around the Middle East in the form of arming and funding various Shia militant groups in the area. Now, the Iranian Ayatollah and Rattlesnake TV don't have too much in common, but one thing that we do have in common is that we both love to keep people armed and dangerous. But we do go about it in slightly different ways. The way that the Iranians go about it is through the IRGC, or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which was founded in 1979, shortly after the revolution. Now, there are multiple divisions of the IRGC, one of them being the Quds Force, which is dedicated to expanding Iran's influence in the Middle East by gathering intelligence, training external groups, and more. And the commander of the Quds Force was none other than Qasem Soleimani, the man who was assassinated by the United States during the Trump administration, and also the man who was supposedly instrumental in expanding Iran's influence in the Middle East. Now, here are some of the regions, but definitely not all of them, where the Quds Force are active. Their main partner is Hezbollah, which translates literally to the Party of God, which is quite frankly, let's just admit it, terrifying. Imagine you're being invaded and you ask, who is it? And they say it's the Party of God. Oh shit. So Hezbollah is a militant force whose main base is on the Israeli-Lebanon border, and one that's no joke either, having already fought a war against Israel in 2006 and more than held their own. They're obviously funded by Iran, and they're the world's largest non-state army, and they're said to have about 150,000 rockets pointed straight at Israel. Next up, following the instability and the fall of Saddam in Iraq, the Quds Force armed and funded Shia militias in the country. There are multiple of these groups that fall under what is known as the PMF, or the Popular Mobilization Forces, which is an umbrella organization. And in Syria, Iran has well and truly entrenched themselves in the Assad government, with their support through Hezbollah and other groups actually essential in Bashar al-Assad surviving the Syrian civil war. Syria and Israel actually share a border, which is disputed land called the Golan Heights. This area was captured by the Israelis during the Six-Day War in 1967, and whilst the US and Israel believe it to be Israeli territory, the international community sees it as Syrian territory that is under occupation by Israel. Iran also funds a group called the Houthis, who we mentioned before, who are a rebel movement that actually now controls over 70% of Yemen and are currently engaged in a war against Saudi Arabia and its allies that's been going on since 2015. And of course, there's Hamas in Gaza. Now, Iran supports Hamas politically. However, Hamas are Sunni Arabs and Iran are Shia Persians. And they were actually on opposing sides during the Syrian civil war. But you know what they say, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And just for a bit more context as to how complicated this is, Hamas is an offshoot of the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood, whilst Hezbollah up north was born in the wake of the 1979 Iranian Revolution, and they are Shia Muslims. They don't actually agree with each other ideologically, but they are funded by the same people and fighting against the same enemy. It's a complicated situation in the Middle East. Nevertheless, Iran has a lot of pull in the area, and they basically have Israel completely surrounded, from Lebanon up north to Iraq and Syria, Gaza, and then Yemen down south, who have got those rockets that could supposedly hit various different places in Israel. And guys, if Qasem Soleimani was the man who was pulling the strings and moving the needle with these operations, you can kind of see why there would be some people who would much prefer him to be now in the Shadow Realm than in the Middle East. And if you ever wondered why Israel needed such an astoundingly robust defense system, that's why. Now, pretty much all of the aforementioned groups have their own conflicts going on at home. So if they were to actually engage Israel, they would need to take their eye off the ball and stretch themselves pretty thin, which probably wouldn't be the wisest move. And although they've both pretty emphatically taken the side of the Palestinians, Russia has their hands pretty full right now, and China has their eye on another sweet little peach, and they'll almost certainly not get involved. Iran using their proxies looks like the most likely option, which means that just as the USA are fighting a proxy war against Russia by funding and arming Ukraine, Iran would use similar tactics to fight against Israel. But to what extent would they do it? I have no idea. We have to wait and see. From what they have said though, they are going to do it. Might just be a flex, might be serious. Furthermore, Joe Biden has just visited Israel and has now requested to send them a whopping $14.3 billion, despite, of course, the country already being trillions of dollars in debt with an open border and homeless people shitting in the streets of their capital cities. And British PM Rishi Sunak has also visited. Also, the USA currently has 2 Navy carrier groups being positioned in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. And make no mistake, guys, these aren't to fight Hamas. Israel will need absolutely no help with that. These are there to deter Iran from getting involved. I might be wrong here, guys, but it looks like there's a bit of a my older brother will come and beat you up. Oh yeah, well, my older brother's bigger than your older brother sort of game going on here. And last thing I'll say is this, guys. Amongst all the immense, almost unfathomable amounts of suffering that is happening at the moment, the other thing that's suffering is progress. The Trump administration did a great job of brokering the Abraham Accords, which many actually believe to be an enormous step towards peace in the Middle East. His approach seemed to be a hard line against Iran and trying to isolate them and hurt them as much as possible, whilst brokering peace deals with other countries. Whilst this would have been a very bitter pill for the Ayatollah to swallow, I think a lot of people would say that it was a net good for the world and for peace. And I think that recent events might substantiate that notion. And had Trump stayed in office and brought more countries into the Abraham Accords, who knows what could have happened. It seemed to me, and this is pure speculation again, that there were a lot of Islamic countries that were kind of looking, observing the situation, and reluctantly considering dipping their toes into the waters of the Abraham Accords with a consideration for all of the potential benefits of having these global alliances. However, now we can essentially kiss that goodbye. Just think about the amount of internal pressure alone that a Muslim leader would get from their people if they were to start negotiating deals with Israel, whilst Israel are preparing to, or even doing, what they're supposedly saying they're about to do in Gaza. This would surely put these leaders at risk of even being overthrown by their own people. So that one is essentially dead in the water. And now, let's have a look at a few men that are wiser than me discussing what a path forward might look like.
So there's got to be a response. Hamas did this. The people who did it obviously need to be punished.
Yes.
Killed.
Yes.
So what do you think a wiser course for the United States and for Israel would be at this point?
I'm running for U.S. president. My job is to look at this through the prism of U.S. interests. But if we're talking to Israel, one of the things we need is, what is your actual objective? Here's one sensible version that the U.S. could fully support. Israel's going to define its objective, and it's up to the U.S. to say, here's what we can support and here's what we can't. But here's one version of it that if I were U.S. president, I would support all the way through, and I happen to think it's among the best answers for Israel itself. Think about a world in which Israel has a clearly defined objective, say the top 100 in Hamas. Okay, we want their heads on stakes, line that southern border of Israel and Gaza. With those heads, as you build a new border defense, there's your deterrence. Top 100 people, whatever it is, a clearly defined objective, achieve the actual retribution and justice that needs to be exacted in this situation.
So kill the people who did it.
Kill the people who did it. Absolutely. And is that the top 100? But who are the people in Hamas? That's an achievable objective. Go in and get that done. And I think the U.S. should help from an intelligence perspective with this. I think the U.S. can be helpful with what we might call the diplomatic Iron Dome. Let Israel do this to fully defend itself without the UN or anybody else in the rest of the world getting in the way. Get U.S. allies, intelligence sharing, the kinds of things that don't get the U.S. involved militarily. Israel's capable of doing this. The Mossad is capable of doing this. And think about Munich Olympics 2.0. The version of this is an achievable goal. It is proper, it is just, it is morally justified. And anybody from the left in this country or Europe or anywhere who rejects that, no. This is Israel defending itself as it has the right to do.
And punishing the people
who actually did it.
Right.
That's exactly right.
That seems like a pretty obvious solution.
I think
and it seems within the capabilities of the state of Israel, and it seems like we could help with that.
And it's an achievable win, right? And I would sort of even think about now one step further. Against the backdrop of achieving that, I don't think it's crazy, Tucker, for Israel to think about some unconventional approaches here. I mean, I think Israel would...
Wait, can I ask you to pause real quick? Has anyone suggested that? That seems like such an obvious solution.
Not that I've heard, Tucker.
Why?
I think that there's a culture of fear right now in the United States. I'm not speaking for Israel, I'm speaking for the culture here in the U.S., where, yes, all of us, I'm sure you and I included, share an emotionally visceral reaction to what happened with Israel being that wrong. But I think that emotional, visceral reaction has everybody looking to each other to talk about the periphery of the issue, right? Everybody's so eager to talk about whether you're going to condemn the, college student groups that are making silly statements over here or the $100 million of humanitarian aid over there. I see Republicans rushing to, analyze the mosquitoes on the elephant's tail without talking about the actual elephant in the room.
But this just seems like
what we should do.
If we believe someone committed murder, we find that person and we punish him.
That's right.
So that would seem like the most obvious solution.
Well, I think that there are some in the U.S. that are so bloodthirsty and have been rooting for outcomes that have really, from their standpoint, nothing to do with this conflict, that might want to use this conflict as an excuse to do what they otherwise might have wanted to do anyway, which is reopen broad-scale regional war in the Middle East, which we haven't had since Iraq and Afghanistan came to a close. These are cynical forces that exist in some wings of the U.S. But I can't speak for why others aren't really clear-headedly asking, what exactly is our plan of action? What advances U.S. interests? What exactly should we tell Israel we will and won't support? And how could that possibly positively influence Israel to make the right decisions here? But I think there's first principle, go after the people who are responsible for this in an achievable goal in a way, and I would say, metaphorically or literally, put their heads on stakes, make sure that we actually have a clear deterrence, that something like this never happens again. And then I think there are ways that Israel could really turn the tables here.
So you're not arguing on behalf of Hamas?
Of course. I mean, the things that people will say on the internet appall me, but Hamas is a terrorist group and deserves to be held accountable for the dastardly acts. I mean, this was barbaric. It was medieval. And I think a direct response to exact justice from Hamas is 100% morally justified. And as U.S. president, if I were in that office, I would provide every bit of diplomatic air cover to Israel to do what it needs to do. because I'm also looking after the U.S. interest here. I don't want the U.S. military involved in some tripwire of a war in the Middle East that we sleepwalk ourselves into, which isn't good for the U.S., but isn't even likely good for Israel.
So there you have it, guys. I'm looking forward to reading your thoughts and comments below. By the time you've watched this, maybe there's already been a ground invasion of some sort. Maybe this conflict has completely changed shape. No doubt there's going to be a lot happening in the coming weeks, months, and probably years with this conflict. And so that's all I've got for you today, guys. And you can find me with those links just below. And if you guys want to subscribe to the channel, you can click right here. If you guys would like to watch another video, right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV, keeping you armed and dangerous.